London, 1895. A mysterious vandal smashes 6 plaster busts of Napoleon Bonaparte, leaving Scotland Yard baffled. When Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson investigate, they uncover a trail of greed and betrayal leading to the Black Pearl of the Borghese, priceless gem hidden in one of the busts. From the foggy streets of Kensington to a deadly chase in Limehouse, Holmes unravels a conspiracy driven by a cunning mastermind. In just 30 seconds, dive into a tale of deception, treasure, and the relentless pursuit of truth in the adventure of the 6 Napoleons. Chapter 1. The Shattered Bust-It. Was upon a chill and foggy evening in the October of 1895 that I found myself once again seated in the familiar confines of our lodgings at 2-1B Baker Street, the air thick with the acrid scent of Sherlock Holmes's shag tobacco. The fire crackled in the grate, casting long shadows across the room, where papers and chemical apparatus lay strewn in that peculiar disorder which only Holmes could navigate with ease. I, John H. Watson, M.D., lately returned from my afternoon rounds, had settled into my armchair with a volume of Carlyle, seeking respite from the damp gloom of London's autumn. Holmes, clad in his mouse-coloured dressing gown, lounged opposite, his lean frame half reclined, a pipe clenched between his teeth, and his eyes fixed upon some distant point beyond the confines of our walls. His mood, as was often the case, seemed poised between languor and the restless anticipation of a mind-craving occupation. The silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of a passing hansom or the muffled cry of a street vendor, was abruptly shattered by the sharp ring of our doorbell. Mrs. Hudson's measured tread ascended the stairs, and a moment later the door swung open to admit Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. His ferret-like features, usually marked by a certain smug assurance, bore an expression of mingled exasperation and curiosity, and his overcoat glistened with the damp of the evening mist. "Good evening, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," said he, shaking the moisture from his hat and accepting the chair I gestured toward. "I trust I'm not intruding, but I have a matter on my hands that's got me fairly stumped, and I thought it might be up your alley." Holmes's eyes, which had momentarily brightened at the sound of the bell, now gleamed with that peculiar intensity which betokened his interest. He set aside his pipe and leaned forward, his long fingers interlaced. "Pray, Lestrade, do not keep us in suspense. What is this matter that troubles Scotland Yard?" Lestrade cleared his throat, casting a glance at me as though to gauge whether I, too, was prepared for what he had to impart. "It's a queer business, Mr. Holmes, and no mistake. Over the past week, 3 plaster busts of Napoleon Bonaparte have been smashed to bits in different parts of London, and we're no nearer to laying hands on the culprit than we were at the start." Holmes's brow arched slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 3 busts of Napoleon. You say, identical in every respect? "Precisely," replied Lestrade, nodding vigorously. "All cast from the same mould, manufactured by Gelder & Co., a firm in Stepney that turns out such things by the dozen. The first was taken from a shop in Kensington, the second from a private residence in Chelsea, and the third, only last night, from a doctor's consulting room in Bloomsbury. Each one dashed to pieces, and not a shred of a clue as to why." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly upon the arm of his chair, a sure sign that his mind was already at work. "And nothing else was taken? No other damage done?" "Not a thing," said Lestrade, spreading his hands. "That's what makes it so confoundedly odd. The shop in Kensington had a window forced, but nothing stolen. The house in Chelsea had a door jimmied, yet only the bust was touched. And in Bloomsbury, the bust was smashed right where it stood on the doctor's shelf. The owners are at their wits' end, and the newspapers are beginning to make a fuss. The Napoleon smasher, they're calling him. Holmes chuckled softly, though his eyes remained sharp. A melodramatic epithet, but not without its charm. Tell me, Lestrade, were these busts of any particular value? None whatsoever, said Lestrade. Cheap plaster things, worth a few shillings at most. That's what makes the whole affair so baffling. If it were a jewel or a painting, I could understand it, but these, they're common as dirt. Holmes leaned back, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. Common, perhaps, but not without significance. Napoleon, after all, is no ordinary figure. A symbol of conquest, of ambition, of revolution. To someone, these busts represent something worth the risk of burglary and destruction. The question is, what? I ventured to interject, sensing an opportunity to clarify. Could it be some political fanatic? A Republican, perhaps, with a grudge against imperial symbols? Holmes shook his head, though not dismissively. A plausible theory, Watson, but it lacks precision. A fanatic might deface a statue in public view to make a statement, but these acts are clandestine, calculated. The perpetrator seeks no audience, only the busts themselves. There is method here, and we must uncover it. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Well, Mr. Holmes, I'd be much obliged if you'd take a look at the matter. I've men combing the scenes, but they're turning up nothing but plaster dust. If you and Dr. Watson could spare the time, say no more, interrupted Holmes, rising with sudden energy. Watson, put aside your Carlyle. This promises to be far more stimulating than historical philosophy. Lestrade, we shall accompany you to the scenes tomorrow morning. In the meantime, pray obtain from Gelder & Co. a list of all who purchased these particular busts. The mould, you say, is unique. So Gelder told me, said Lestrade. They made a small batch, no more than a dozen or so, and these three were among them. Excellent, said Holmes. A limited field narrows our inquiry. Until tomorrow, then. Lestrade departed, leaving behind a faint air of relief, as though the mere act of consulting Holmes had lightened his burden. I, too, felt a stir of excitement, for it had been some weeks since Holmes had taken up a case with such evident relish. As he resumed his pipe and sank back into his chair, I could see the wheels of his mind turning, piecing together the fragments of this curious puzzle. The following morning dawned grey and raw, the fog having thickened into a pea souper that clung to the streets like a malevolent spirit. Holmes, undeterred by the weather, was in high spirits as we set out in a four-wheeler with Lestrade, bound for Bloomsbury and the consulting room of Dr. Barnicot, the site of the most recent outrage. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional muffled clop of hooves, or the cry of a newsboy hawking his wares. Holmes, wrapped in his ulster, sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the passing blur of gaslit shop fronts. Though I knew his thoughts were elsewhere, Dr. Barnicot's practice was situated in a respectable, if unremarkable, street off Russell Square. The doctor, a portly man with a florid complexion and a manner that suggested both competence and agitation, greeted us at the door. Mr. Holmes, Inspector Lestrade, I'm glad you've come, he said, ushering us into a neat consulting room that smelled faintly of carbolic and tobacco. This business has quite upset me. To think of someone breaking in here, of all places. The room was orderly, its walls lined with medical texts and a few modest pictures. A shelf above the fireplace, however, bore the unmistakable signs of the Crime, a scattering of white plaster fragments, some no larger than a pebble, littered the floor beneath. The bust, Lestrade explained, had stood upon this shelf until the previous night. When it was found shattered, Holmes knelt beside the debris, his lens in hand, examining the fragments with the care of an archaeologist unearthing a relic. "Plaster, as you said," he murmured, turning a jagged piece between his fingers. "Poorly mixed, by the look of it full of air bubbles. Mass-produced, no doubt, but cast with some care. The force used was considerable. See here, Watson, the edges are clean, not crumbled. This was no accidental blow, but a deliberate act of violence." I peered at the fragments, noting the sharp lines where the plaster had sheared apart. "It must have been struck with something heavy," I said. "Indeed," said Holmes. "A hammer, perhaps, or a stout stick." "Lestrade, was there any sign of forced entry here?" "None," said the inspector. "The door was locked, and the windows secure. Dr. Barnicot found the mess when he arrived this morning." The bust was smashed right where it stood. Holmes rose, brushing the dust from his knees. "Curious. In Kensington and Chelsea, the busts were removed before being destroyed, yet here the act was performed in situ. A variation in method, but the intent remains constant." "Dr. Barnicot, had you noticed anything unusual about the bust prior to this incident? Any marks, any tampering?" The doctor shook his head. "None at all. It was a gift from a patient, a Mr. Harker, who purchased it from a shop in Kensington. I thought it a quaint thing, though I confess I'm no admirer of Napoleon. I kept it on the shelf for sentiment's sake." "Harker, you say?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The same Harker whose shop was targeted?" "The very same," said Lestrade. "Horace Harker, a journalist by trade. He runs a small curio shop in Kensington as a sideline. His bust was the first to go." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "A thread begins to emerge. Lestrade, I must see the other scenes. Dr. Barnicot, I thank you for your time. Should anything further occur to you, pray send word to Baker Street." We departed Bloomsbury and made our way to Kensington, where Horace Harker's shop stood on a bustling high street. The window, recently repaired, bore the faint scars of a forced entry, and Harker himself, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous disposition, greeted us with a torrent of complaints. "It's an outrage, Mr. Holmes," he exclaimed. "To think of some ruffian breaking into my shop for a paltry bust. I write for the Evening Chronicle, you know, and I've half a mind to publish a piece on the incompetence of the police." Lestrade bristled, but Holmes raised a hand to forestall any retort. "Mr. Harker, pray describe the incident. Every detail, however trivial, may be of use." Harker, mollified by Holmes's calm authority, recounted the event. The bust had stood in his shop window, a modest decoration among other curios. On the night of the theft, a pane had been broken, and the bust was found shattered in the street some yards away. "Nothing else was touched," he said. "Not a single trinket missing. I thought it a prank at first, but now, with these others, Holmes examined the window, his lens tracing the jagged edges of the repaired glass. "The break is clean, the work of a glazier's diamond," he observed. "The thief was no amateur, and the bust was carried some distance before being destroyed. Why not smash it in the shop?" "Perhaps he was disturbed," I suggested. "Possibly," said Holmes, though his tone suggested doubt. "Yet the precision of the act speaks to purpose. Lestrade, what of the Chelsea case?" We proceeded to Chelsea, where Mrs. Warren, a distant cousin of our own Mrs. Hudson, resided in a modest terraced house. She received us in her parlour, a cosy room adorned with lace doilies and family photographs. Her Napoleon bust, she explained, had stood on a sideboard until 2 nights prior, when it was taken from the house and found broken in her small garden. "It's a dreadful thing, Mr. Holmes," she said, wringing her hands. "The door was forced, but nothing else was touched. Why would anyone want to destroy a plaster bust? It cost me all of 10 shillings. Holmes paced the parlour, his eyes darting from the sideboard to the garden door. The lock was picked, not broken, he noted, a skilled hand at work, and the bust was carried outside before being smashed. The pattern holds, yet the motive eludes us. He stepped into the garden, a narrow strip of grass bordered by privet hedges. The fragments of the bust lay scattered near a flower bed, and Holmes knelt to examine them, his lens glinting in the dim light. "The same plaster, the same mould," he said, "but the destruction here was less violent. The bust was dropped, not struck, a subtle difference, but significant." I ventured another theory. Could it be a personal vendetta? Someone with a grudge against the owners? Holmes shook his head. "The victims are unconnected, save by their possession of these busts. No, Watson, the key lies in the busts themselves, or in something they represent. Lestrade, have you the list from Gelder and Co.?" Lestrade produced a folded paper. "Here it is. 6 busts in total, all from the same mould. 3 we know of: Harker's, Mrs. Warren's, and Dr. Barnicott's. The others went to a Mr. Sanderford in Reading, a Mr. Morse Hudson in Kennington, and a man named Beppo, no surname, address unknown." Holmes's eyes gleamed at the mention of Beppo, an Italian name, and an uncommon one. "Lestrade, I suggest you make inquiries about this Beppo. He may be our link. Meanwhile, I shall visit the remaining owners. Watson, are you game for a journey to Reading?" I nodded, my curiosity fully aroused. "Of course, Holmes." As we left Chelsea, the fog had thickened, cloaking the city in a shroud of mystery that seemed to mirror the enigma before us. Holmes, however, was undaunted, his mind already racing ahead to the next thread in this tangled skein. "The Napoleon busts," he murmured almost to himself. 6 in number, 3 destroyed. What secret do they hold, Watson, and who is so desperate to uncover it? We returned to Baker Street, where Holmes spent the evening poring over maps and directories, his pipe sending up clouds of smoke as he muttered about moulds and motives. I, meanwhile, took up my pen to record the day's events, sensing that this was but the opening act of a drama that would test even Holmes's formidable powers. The shattered busts, so ordinary in appearance, had ignited a spark in his mind, and I knew that he would not rest until the truth lay bare before him. As the clock struck midnight, Holmes set aside his papers and lit a fresh pipe. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said, his voice low and resolute, "we shall follow the trail of these Napoleons. There is a purpose here, a hidden hand at work, and I mean to find it." Thus began the adventure of the 6 Napoleons, a case that, for all its apparent simplicity, would lead us through the shadowed byways of London to a revelation as startling as it was unexpected. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The fog of the previous evening had lifted by the time Sherlock Holmes and I, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade, set out for Bloomsbury on the morning following our initial consultation. The air was sharp with the bite of autumn, and the streets bustled with the usual clamour of London carts rattling, hawkers crying their wares, and the distant whistle of a train piercing the din. Holmes, seated beside me in the four-wheeler, was silent, his keen eyes darting to the passing throng as though seeking some clue amidst the chaos of the city. His mood was one of quiet intensity, the kind that presaged a mind wholly absorbed in the unraveling of a mystery. Our destination was the consulting room of Dr. Barnicot, the scene of the most recent outrage in this curious series of crimes. As we drew up to the respectable street off Russell Square, I noted the orderly facades of the Georgian houses, their windows gleaming in the pale sunlight. Dr. Barnicot's practice was housed in one such building, its brass plate polished too, a mirror-like sheen. The doctor himself met us at the door, his face etched with the strain of a man whose orderly life had been disrupted by an inexplicable act. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Inspector," he said, his voice tinged with relief as he ushered us inside. "I cannot tell you how glad I am to see you. This business has left me quite confounded." We followed him into a well-appointed consulting room, its walls lined with shelves of medical tomes and a few tasteful engravings. The air carried the faint scent of antiseptic, mingled with the musty odor of old books. At once, my attention was drawn to a low shelf above the fireplace, where a small pile of white plaster fragments lay scattered across the floor, the remnants of the Napoleon bust. The debris was stark against the polished wood, a silent testament to the violence that had occurred. Holmes, without preamble, dropped to one knee beside the fragments, his magnifying lens already in hand. He sifted through the shards with the precision of a jeweler examining gems, his long fingers turning each piece with care. "Inferior plaster," he murmured, almost to himself, "cast with haste, yet from a mold of some quality. See here, Watson, the texture riddled with air bubbles, but the features are sharply defined. This was no amateur's work." I bent to examine the fragments, noting the clean edges where the plaster had been shattered. "It must have taken considerable force," I remarked. "A heavy blow, perhaps with a hammer." Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving the debris. "Precisely. The fractures are sharp, not crumbled, indicating a single, deliberate strike. The bust was not merely toppled, but struck with intent." He rose, brushing the dust from his trousers, and turned to Dr. Barnicot. "Tell me, sir, exactly how you discovered the damage." The doctor, standing by his desk, wrung his hands nervously. "It was yesterday morning, Mr. Holmes. I arrived at my usual hour, just before 8, to find the door locked as I had left it the previous evening. Nothing seemed amiss until I entered this room and saw the bust in pieces. I keep a tidy practice, as you can see, and the sight was quite a shock. I summoned the police at once. Lestrade, who had been hovering near the door, stepped forward. My men examined the premises, Mr. Holmes. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no jimmied locks. The bust was smashed right where it stood, unlike the other cases." Holmes's brow furrowed, and he paced the room, his gaze sweeping from the shelf to the windows, which were firmly latched. "Curious," he said. "In Kensington and Chelsea, the busts were removed before being destroyed, yet here the act was performed in place. A variation in method, but the object remains constant. Dr. Barnicot, had the bust any particular significance to you?" "None at all," replied the doctor. "It was a gift from Mr. Horace Harker, a patient and a journalist who keeps a shop in Kensington. He gave it to me some months ago, saying he'd come across it in his trade. I thought it a quaint addition to the room, though I confess I've no great fondness for Napoleon. I placed it on the shelf for courtesy's sake." Holmes's eyes gleamed at the mention of Harker, the same Harker whose shop was targeted. He asked, glancing at Lestrade. The very one, confirmed the inspector. His bust was the first to go, smashed in the street outside his shop. A queer coincidence, if you ask me. There are no coincidences in such matters, said Holmes sharply. A thread begins to form, but it is yet to faint to follow. Dr. Bonnicott, had you noticed anyone loitering about your practice in recent days? Any strangers? Any unusual inquiries? The doctor shook his head. None that I recall. My patients are mostly regulars, and I've had no cause to suspect anything untoward. The neighborhood is quiet, respectable. Holmes nodded, though his expression suggested he placed little weight on the absence of obvious suspects. He moved to the shelf, examining its surface with his lens. No dust disturbed beyond the immediate area of the bust, he noted. The perpetrator was careful, precise. This was no act of random vandalism. He turned to Lestrade. Have your men searched for footprints or other traces outside? We did, said Lestrade. Nothing but the usual boot marks in the street, and those could belong to anyone. The fog was thick last night, and it's likely any clear prints were obscured. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile, as though the challenge of a clean crime scene only sharpened his resolve. Very well, let us proceed to Kensington. I must see the other scenes to confirm the pattern. We took our leave of Dr. Bonnicott, who seemed somewhat reassured by Holmes's presence, though still visibly shaken. The four-wheeler bore us through the crowded streets to Kensington, where Horace Harker's curio shop stood on a busy thoroughfare. The shop was a narrow affair, its window crowded with an eclectic array of items: brass, candlesticks, porcelain figurines, and faded prints. A new pane of glass gleamed in the frame. The only sign of the recent break-in, Harker, a wiry man with a pinched face and ink-stained fingers, greeted us with a mixture of indignation and curiosity. Mr. Holmes, Inspector Lestrade, he said, his voice sharp with the cadence of a man accustomed to deadlines. I trust you're here to make sense of this nonsense. To think of someone smashing my Napoleon bust. It's an affront, sir, an affront. Holmes, unruffled by Harker's bluster, surveyed the shop with a practiced eye. Pray, Mr. Harker, recount the incident in detail. Leave nothing out, however trivial it may seem. Harker puffed out his chest, as though preparing to deliver a column for his newspaper. It was 5 nights ago, Mr. Holmes. I locked up the shop at 10, as is my custom, and retired to my rooms above. Sometime in the night, I cannot say when, for I'm a sound sleeper, I was roused by a crash. I thought little of it, assuming it was a drunkard in the street. In the morning, I found the window broken and the bust gone. It was lying in pieces, some 20 yards down the road, as if someone had carried it there before smashing it. Holmes moved to the window, his lens tracing the edges of the new glass. A glazier's diamond, as I suspected, he said. The cut is precise, the work of a skilled hand. And nothing else was taken. Not a thing, said Harker. I've valuable items here, Silver. Jewelry, but the thief touched none of them. Only the bust, which I'd bought for a song from Gelder and Co. in Stepney. I thought it a fine piece for the window, you see. Holmes's gaze lingered on the street outside, where pedestrians hurried past in the morning chill. The bust was carried before being destroyed, he mused. Why not break it in the shop? The act suggests deliberation, perhaps a need to avoid detection. Lestrade was the debris examined. We collected what we could, said Lestrade. Just plaster, same as the others. No fingerprints, no tools left behind. The street was swept clean by the morning's traffic. Holmes nodded, his expression inscrutable. We must see the Chelsea scene. The pattern is emerging, but it remains incomplete. Our next stop was the home of Mrs. Warren in Chelsea, a modest terraced house on a quiet street. Mrs. Warren, a stout woman with a kindly face and a faint resemblance to our own Mrs. Hudson, welcomed us into her parlour. The room was a study in domestic comfort, with lace curtains and a well-polished sideboard, now conspicuously bare where the Napoleon bust had once stood. "It's a dreadful thing, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "to think of someone breaking into my home. The bust was a gift from my late husband's cousin, bought from a shop in Kennington. I kept it here as a memento, though I'll confess it wasn't to my taste." Holmes examined the sideboard, noting the faint ring in the dust where the bust had rested. "The door was forced, I understand." "Yes," said Mrs. Warren, "the garden door at the back. It was jimmied open, though I heard nothing in the night. In the morning, I found the bust gone, and later that day, my maid discovered the pieces in the garden." Holmes stepped through the garden door, a narrow affair leading to a small patch of lawn bordered by privet hedges. The fragments of the bust lay near a flower bed, less violently shattered than those in Bloomsbury. Holmes knelt, his lens glinting as he studied the ground. "The grass is undisturbed," he said. "No heavy boot marks, no signs of a struggle. The bust was dropped, not struck. A subtle distinction, but significant. I ventured a suggestion. Could the thief have been interrupted? Perhaps he fled before completing the act." "Possible, but unlikely," said Holmes. "The pattern suggests intent, not haste. In each case, the bust is removed or destroyed with care, yet the motive remains obscure. Napoleon, a figure of conquest and power, why target his likeness? And in such a specific form?" Lestrade, who had been listening with growing impatience, spoke up. "I've got the list from Gelder and Co., as you asked. 6 busts in total, all from the same mould. We know of Harker's, Mrs. Warren's, and Dr. Barnicot's. The others went to a Mr. Sanderford in Reading, a Mr. Morse Hudson in Kennington, and a man named Beppo, no address given." Holmes's eyes flickered with interest at the mention of Beppo, an Italian name, he said softly, and an elusive one. "Lestrade, I urge you to trace this Beppo with all haste. He may hold the key to our puzzle. Meanwhile, Watson and I shall visit Mr. Sanderford in Reading. The remaining busts are at risk, and we must act swiftly." As we left Mrs. Warren's house, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting a pale light over the city. Holmes, however, seemed oblivious to the change in weather, his mind wholly occupied with the enigma of the shattered busts. 3 down, 3 to go," he murmured as we climbed into the four-wheeler. "There is a purpose here, Watson, a hidden design, and I mean to uncover it before another Napoleon falls." Thus we set out, the trail of the 6 Napoleons leading us deeper into a mystery that, for all its apparent simplicity, promised to test even Holmes's formidable intellect. The scenes of the crimes, so disparate in their settings, were bound by a single thread, the busts themselves, and I could not shake the feeling that within their plaster forms lay a secret far greater than their humble appearance suggested. Chapter 3. The Trail of Fragments. The morning sun, struggling through a veil of clouds, cast a pallid glow over London as Sherlock Holmes and I, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade, continued our pursuit of the curious case of the shattered Napoleon. Busts, the events of the previous day had left me with a sense of restless anticipation. For while the crimes appeared trivial on their surface, mere acts of vandalism against cheap plaster ornaments, Holmes's keen interest suggested a deeper significance. His manner, as we rattled through the streets in our four-wheeler, was one of suppressed energy, his sharp eyes scanning the passing city as though it might yield some hidden clue. Our first destination was the curio shop of Mr. Horace Harker in Kensington, where the initial outrage had occurred. The shop, nestled on a busy thoroughfare, was a narrow establishment, its window a jumble of trinkets and oddities that seemed to spill over from the cluttered interior. The new pane of glass, replacing the one broken during the theft, gleamed incongruously amidst the faded display. Harker, a wiry man with the harried air of a journalist perpetually behind deadline, greeted us with a mixture of indignation and eagerness, as though our presence promised both vindication and material. For his next column, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Inspector Lestrade, he said, his voice sharp with agitation. I trust you've come to put an end to this nonsense. To think of my shop being targeted for a paltry bust. It's an insult, sir, and I've half a mind to write a scathing piece for the Evening Chronicle. Holmes, unruffled by bluster, surveyed the shop with a practiced eye, his gaze lingering on the window where the Napoleon bust had once stood. Pray, Mr. Harker, let us revisit the particulars of the incident, he said, his tone calm but commanding. Describe the events of that night, and omit no detail, however slight. Harker adjusted his spectacles and launched into his account with the fervor of a man accustomed to spinning tales. It was 6 nights ago, Mr. Holmes. I locked the shop at 10, as is my habit, and retired to my rooms upstairs. Sometime in the night past midnight, I'd wager, though I cannot be precise, for I was asleep. I heard a faint crash. I thought it nothing more than a street rowdy, common enough in these parts. In the morning, I found the window broken, a clean cut through the glass, and the bust gone. I discovered it later, smashed to bits in the street, some 20 yards from the shop. Holmes moved to the window, his magnifying lens glinting as he examined the new pane. A glazier's diamond, as I observed yesterday, he said. The cut is precise, the work of a professional. And you say nothing else was taken? Not a single item, Harker replied, gesturing to the crowded shelves. I've silver candlesticks, ivory carvings, even a few old coins worth far more than that bust, which cost me all of 8 shillings from Gelder and Co. Why anyone would bother with it is beyond me. Holmes stepped outside, beckoning us to follow. The street was alive with the morning trade costermongers shouting, hansoms clattering, and pedestrians weaving through the throng. He knelt near the spot where the bust had been found, his lens sweeping over the cobbles. The fragments were scattered here, he said, pointing to a patch of ground near a lamppost. The bust was carried some distance before being destroyed. Why not smash it in the shop, where the act could be concealed by the clutter? Perhaps the thief was disturbed, I suggested, recalling my earlier theory. Holmes shook his head, his expression thoughtful. Disturbance implies haste, Watson. And this act was deliberate. The bust was removed with care, carried to this point, and then shattered. The perpetrator sought something specific, and I begin to suspect it was not the bust itself, but something it contained or represented. Lestrade, who had been listening with a frown, interjected. But what could a cheap plaster bust contain? It's not as if it were a jewel box or a safe. Holmes's eyes gleamed. That, Lestrade, is the heart of the matter. We must assume the busts are more than they seem. Let us proceed to Chelsea, to Mrs. Warren's residence. The trail of fragments may yet lead us to the truth. We climbed back into the four-wheeler and made our way to Chelsea, a quieter district where rows of terraced houses stood in orderly ranks. Mrs. Warren's home was a modest affair, its facade brightened by a small garden bordered by privet hedges. She welcomed us into her parlour, a cosy room filled with the homely touches of a widow's careful housekeeping, lace doilies, polished furniture, and a few cherished photographs. Her face, lined with worry, softened slightly at the sight of Lestrade, whom she seemed to regard as a reassuring authority. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling with the memory of the intrusion. "I cannot tell you how unsettling this has been. To think of someone breaking into my home for a mere bust. It was a gift from my husband's cousin, bought from a shop in Kennington. I kept it on the sideboard, more for sentiment than anything else." Holmes examined the sideboard, a sturdy piece of oak that bore a faint ring in the dust where the bust had rested. "The garden door was forced, I understand?" he asked, moving to inspect the door in question. "Yes," said Mrs. Warren, leading us to the back of the house. The door, a simple affair opening onto the garden, bore faint scratches around the lock. "I heard nothing in the night, Mr. Holmes. I'm a light sleeper, but the fog was thick, and it muffles sound. In the morning, I found the door ajar and the bust gone. My maid, Jane, discovered the pieces in the garden later that day." Holmes stepped into the garden, a narrow strip of lawn flanked by flower beds. The fragments of the bust lay near a bed of chrysanthemums, their white plaster stark against the dark earth. He knelt, his lens in hand, studying the debris with the same meticulous care he had shown in Bloomsbury. "The plaster is identical to the others," he said, "cast from the same mould, as Lestrade's list confirms. But note the manner of destruction, less violent than at Dr. Barnicot's. The bust was dropped, not struck. The edges are softer, the fragments larger." I peered at the shards, noting the difference. "Why the variation?" I asked. "If the same person is responsible, why not use the same method?" Holmes rose, brushing the soil from his knees. "A pertinent question, Watson. It suggests either a change in circumstance or intent. Perhaps the perpetrator was hurried, or perhaps the method of destruction is secondary to the act itself. The key lies in the busts. Why these 6, and why now?" Lestrade produced the list from Gelder & Co., unfolding it with a flourish. "As you requested, Mr. Holmes, here's the full tally. 6 busts, all from the same mould. Harker's in Kensington, Mrs. Warren's in Chelsea, Dr. Barnicot's in Bloomsbury, a Mr. Sandiford in Reading, a Mr. Morse Hudson in Kennington, and this fellow Beppo, addressed unknown. I've men searching for him, but he's a slippery sort, by all accounts." Holmes's eyes narrowed at the mention of Beppo, an Italian name, and one that stands out in this quintessentially English affair. "Lestrade, redouble your efforts to find this Beppo. He may be our link to the motive. Meanwhile, Watson and I shall visit Mr. Sandiford in Reading. The remaining busts are in danger, and we must act before the trail grows cold." As we prepared to leave, Holmes lingered in the garden, his gaze fixed on the scattered fragments. "Napoleon," he murmured, almost to himself, "a symbol of power, of conquest, of ambition. To our perpetrator, he represents something specifics, something worth the risk of burglary and destruction. But what a grudge, a message, or something more tangible?" I ventured a theory, emboldened by his reflective mood. "Could it be a relic of some kind? Perhaps these busts conceal something valuable, hidden during their manufacture. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. A promising hypothesis, Watson, though we lack evidence to support it. Yet, the idea of concealment is not without merit. The busts are too ordinary to warrant such attention unless they hold a secret. We must examine the remaining ones with care. We returned to the four-wheeler, the weight of the mystery settling over us like the autumn chill. As we drove toward the station to catch a train to Reading, Holmes sat in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. I knew that Lucky's mind was a crucible, refining the raw facts into a coherent pattern. The trail of fragments, from Kensington to Chelsea to Bloomsbury, was leading us somewhere, though the destination remained shrouded in shadow. At the station, as we awaited our train, Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight with purpose. 3 busts destroyed, Watson, and 3 remain. The game is afoot, and I sense we are on the verge of a revelation. Let us hope Mr. Sandiford's bust is still intact, for it may hold the key to this enigma. Thus we set forth, the trail of the 6 Napoleons, drawing us ever deeper into a puzzle that, for all its apparent simplicity, promised a solution as intricate as any Holmes had ever unraveled. The fragments of plaster, scattered across London, were but the visible traces of a hidden design, and I felt a thrill of anticipation at the thought of what truths they might yet reveal. Chapter 4. The manufacturers clued the trail of the shattered Napoleon busts had, by the afternoon of our investigation, drawn us from the genteel streets of Bloomsbury and Chelsea to the grimy, bustling precincts of Stepney, where the firm of Gelder & Co. operated its modest manufactory. The air grew thick with the tang of coal smoke and the clamour of industry as our four-wheeler navigated the narrow lanes, past soot-stained warehouses and the cries of dockworkers along the Thames. Sherlock Holmes, seated beside me, was a study. In quiet intensity, his sharp features set in a mask of concentration, his fingers drumming lightly on the edge of his stick. Inspector Lestrade, opposite us, fidgeted with his notebook, his ferret-like eyes betraying a growing impatience with the case's elusive nature. Stepney, Holmes remarked, glancing out the window at the passing jumble of workshops and tenements. A fitting place for the birth of our mysterious busts, the heart of London's industry, where the ordinary is crafted in bulk. Yet something extraordinary lies within these commonplace objects, Watson. I feel it. I nodded, my own curiosity piqued by the pattern of destruction we had traced thus far. 3 busts of Napoleon, all from the same mould, had been violently destroyed. Harker's in Kensington, Mrs. Warren's in Chelsea, and Dr. Barnicot's in Bloomsbury. The acts, though varied in their execution, pointed to a singular purpose, one that Holmes was determined to uncover. "Do you think the manufacturer might know more than he's let on?" I asked. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Manufacturers are often blind to the significance of their wares, Watson. But they keep records, and records are the lifeblood of our inquiry. Gelder & Co. will provide the next link in our chain." We arrived at the premises of Gelder & Co., a squat brick building wedged between a cooper's yard and a timber merchant's warehouse. The air was heavy with the scent of plaster dust and linseed oil, and the rhythmic clatter of machinery echoed. From within, a foreman directed us to the office of Mr. Josiah Gelder, the proprietor, who met us with the weary air of a man accustomed to the demands of commerce. "Gentlemen," said Gelder, rising from behind a cluttered desk strewn with invoices and ledgers. He was a stout man, his waistcoat strained over a generous paunch, his face ruddy from years in the heat of the workshop. "Inspector Lestrade, I presume. And these must be Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson. I've been expecting you. What with this business about the Napoleon busts? A queer affair and bad for trade, I'll tell you." Holmes inclined his head, his eyes already scanning the office, taking in the shelves of sample casts and the faded prints of classical statuary on the walls. "Mr. Gelder, we are investigating the destruction of 3 plaster busts of Napoleon, all produced by your firm. I understand they were cast from a single mold. Can you confirm this?" Gelder nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth as though to rid them of invisible dust. "Aye, that's right. We made a small batch last year, 6 busts in total, all from the same mold. It was a special order, you see, not one of our regular lines. Napoleon's not much in demand these days, but we had a buyer who wanted them, so we obliged. Cheap things, mind you, cast in plaster and sold for a few shillings apiece." Holmes's gaze sharpened. 6 busts, you say, and you have records of their distribution?" Gelder shuffled to a filing cabinet, retrieving a ledger bound in cracked leather. "I do, indeed. We keep track of every sale, Mr. Holmes. Let's see." He flipped through the pages, his thick fingers tracing the entries. "Here we are. The 6 busts went to the following: 1 to Mr. Horace Harker, the journalist in Kensington; 1 to Mrs. Emily Warren in Chelsea; 1 to Dr. Barnicot in Bloomsbury; 1 to Mr. Samuel Sandiford, a solicitor in Reading; 1 to Mr. Morse Hudson, a tobacconist in Kennington; and the last 2, a fellow named Beppo, no surname given and no address listed. He paid in cash and took it away himself." Holmes's eyes gleamed at the mention of Beppo, a name that had already surfaced in Lestrade's inquiries. "Beppo," he repeated softly. "An Italian, presumably. Tell me, Mr. Gelder, was this Beppo known to you? Had he purchased from you before?" Gelder scratched his chin, his brow furrowing. "Can't say he was a regular, but he'd been about the place a time or two. Worked for us briefly last year in the casting room, but we let him go. Caught him pilfering supplies, plaster, tools, that sort of thing. Shifty fellow, always muttering to himself in Italian. I didn't think much of it when he bought the bust, though. He paid fair and square." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and I could see the spark of a theory forming in his mind. "And the mold itself," he continued, "is it still in use? Or was this batch of 6 unique?" "Unique, as far as it goes," said Gelder. "The mold was made for that order, and we've not used it since. It's stored in the back, if you care to see it. We've dozens of other molds, Caesar, Wellington, Shakespeare, but these Napoleon ones were a one-off. The buyer who ordered them didn't specify why, and I didn't ask. Business is business." Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I should like to see the mold, Mr. Gelder, and the workshop where the busts were made. Every detail of their production may be of consequence." Gelder led us through a set of double doors into the heart of the manufactory, a cavernous space filled with the clatter of machinery and the sharp scent of wet plaster. Workmen moved to and fro, pouring molds, trimming casts, and stacking finished pieces on racks. The air was thick with fine white dust, which settled on our coats like a faint snow. Gelder pointed to a corner where a plaster mold shaped to form. The stern visage of Napoleon Bonaparte rested on a shelf. "There it is," he said. "Nothing special about it. We mix the plaster, pour it in, let it set, and pop out the bust. Takes about a day to cure properly. These were made last spring, as I recall." Holmes examined the mold with his lens, his fingers tracing its contours. "Well crafted," he murmured. "The detail is finer than one might expect for such a modest product. Tell me, Mr. Gelder, was Beppo involved in the casting of these busts?" Gelder thought for a moment. He might have been. He was in the casting room around that time, before we sacked him. I don't keep track of who works on what, but he'd have had access to the molds. Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I could sense the wheels of his mind turning. And the materials, anything unusual in the plaster or the process? "Nothing out of the ordinary," said Gelder. "Just our usual mixed plaster of Paris, water, a bit of binder. We don't fuss with additives unless a client asks for something special, and this lot was plain as plain." Holmes nodded, though his eyes lingered on the mold as though it might whisper its secrets. "Very well, Mr. Gelder. Your cooperation has been most valuable. Should you recall anything further about Beppo or the busts, pray send word to Baker Street. We took our leave of the manufactory, emerging into the smoky air of Stepney with a new piece of the puzzle in hand. As we climbed back into the four-wheeler, Holmes leaned back, his gaze distant. "Beppo," he said softly, "a thief, a worker at Gelder & Co., and now a purchaser of one of the very busts he may have helped create. The thread grows stronger, Watson, but it is not yet a rope." Lestrade, who had been scribbling notes, looked up. "You think this Beppo's our man, then, smashing his own busts for some reason?" Holmes shook his head. "Beppo is a tool, Lestrade, not the hand that wields it. The motive lies deeper, and I suspect it is tied to the busts themselves. Why these 6? Why this mold?" Gelder's testimony confirms their uniqueness, which narrows our field. We must now protect the remaining busts. Sandiford's in Reading and Hudson's in Kennington, and find this Beppo before he strikes again. I ventured a hypothesis, emboldened by the new information. Could Beppo have hidden something in one of the busts during their production? Something valuable, perhaps, that he now seeks to recover. Holmes's eyes flickered with approval. "A sound theory, Watson, and one we must test. The busts are too ordinary to warrant such attention, unless they conceal something of value. But what and why destroy them rather than steal them outright? That is the crux of our mystery." As we rattled back towards central London, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the city. Holmes sat in silence, his mind no doubt sifting through the clues Gelder's ledger. Beppo's shadowy presence, the unique mold, the manufacturers. Clue had brought us closer to the truth, but the heart of the matter remained elusive. 3 busts were gone, their fragments scattered across London like the pieces of a broken cipher. 3 remained, and I could not shake the feeling that their fate would unlock the secret of the 6 Napoleons. "Tomorrow," Holmes said at last, his voice low and resolute, "we shall visit Reading. Mr. Sandiford's bust may hold the next clue or the next target. The game is afoot, Watson, and I sense we are closing in on our quarry." Chapter 5. The 4th bust. The morning following our visit to Gelder & Co. found Sherlock Holmes and me aboard an early train to Reading, the Berkshire town some 40 miles west of London. The countryside rolled past in a blur of autumnal hues-fields, of stubble, copses of amber and russet, and the occasional glimpse of the Thames glinting under a pale sun. Holmes, seated opposite me in the compartment, was unusually silent, his lean frame wrapped in his ulster, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the window. His fingers, however, betrayed his restless energy, tapping a staccato rhythm on the armrest. I knew that look. His mind was a crucible, refining the fragments of evidence we had gathered into a coherent whole. Our purpose was to visit Mr. Samuel Sandford, a retired solicitor whose Napoleon bust, one of the 6 cast by Gelder & Co., remained intact at least for now. The destruction of 3 busts in London had established a pattern, and Holmes was convinced that the remaining 3 were in peril. The name Beppo, the elusive Italian who had worked at the manufactory and purchased one of the busts, lingered. In my thoughts, a shadowy figure at the edge of this curious affair. "Watson," Holmes said at last, breaking the silence as the train rattled through a cutting. "Have you considered the psychology of our perpetrator? The destruction of these busts is not random vandalism. There is purpose here, a single-minded focus. But is it obsession or calculation?" I pondered his question, my medical mind turning to the motives that drive such acts. "It could be either," I ventured. "An obsession with Napoleon, perhaps a personal vendetta against his image. Or, as I suggested before, something hidden within the busts, something worth the risk of burglary." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Your theory of concealment grows more plausible, Watson. The busts are too mundane to warrant such attention unless they serve as vessels for something of value. Beppo's involvement suggests a connection to their creation, but the motive remains tantalizingly out of reach. We arrived in Reading shortly before noon, the station bustling with travellers and porters. A short cab ride brought us to Mr. Sandford's residence, a handsome Georgian house on the outskirts of the town, its brick facade softened by ivy and flanked by a well-kept garden. Sandford, a wiry man in his 60s with the precise manner of a lifelong legal mind, greeted us at the door with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice clipped but courteous. "I had a telegram from Inspector Lestrade this morning, warning me of your visit. This business about the Napoleon busts has me quite on edge. To think my own might be next." He led us into a study lined with law books and adorned with a few sober portraits. On a mahogany table near the window stood the bust in question, its plaster features capturing the stern countenance of Napoleon Bonaparte. The sight of it, identical to the shattered remnants we had seen in London, sent a shiver through me, as though it were a silent sentinel awaiting its fate. Holmes approached the bust, his magnifying lens already in hand. He circled it slowly, his eyes scanning every inch of its surface. "Intact, as yet," he murmured. "The same mould as the others, down to the faint seam along the base." "Mr. Sandford, how came you by this bust?" Sandford adjusted his spectacles, his fingers trembling slightly. "I purchased it last year from Gelder & Co. in Stepney. I've a small collection of historical curios, nothing grand. Mind you, and I thought it a fitting addition. Napoleon, after all, is a figure of some significance, whatever one's view of him." Holmes's gaze lingered on the bust, his fingers tapping lightly on its surface. "Have you noticed anything unusual about it? Any marks? Any tampering?" "None at all," said Sandford. "It stood there since I bought it, untouched. But after hearing of the others' Harkers, Mrs. Warren's, Dr. Barnicot's, I've been uneasy. Do you think it's in danger, Mr. Holmes?" "I am certain of it," said Holmes gravely. "Which is why we must take precautions, Mr. Sandford. I advise you to lock this bust in a secure place tonight as safe. If you have one, Dr. Watson and I shall keep watch, with your permission." Sandford's eyes widened. "You think the vandal will come here, to Reading?" "I think it likely," said Holmes. "The pattern is clear. 3 busts destroyed, 3 remain. Yours is one, and we must assume it is a target. Will you cooperate, Sandford? Nodded, his face pale. Of course, Mr. Holmes. I've a small safe in the cellar, used for documents. I'll move the bust there at once. While Sandford busied himself with the task, Holmes drew me aside. Watson, tonight may be our chance to catch our quarry in the act. The perpetrator is methodical, but not infallible. If Beppo or his confederates come for this bust, we shall be ready. The remainder of the day passed in a state of tense preparation. Sandford, at Holmes's instruction, secured the bust in his cellar safe, a sturdy iron box bolted to the floor. Holmes and I took turns reconnoitering the house and its grounds, noting every possible point of entry. The study window, overlooking the garden, seemed the most likely target, its latch old and easily forced. Holmes, with his usual foresight, rigged a subtle trap. A thin thread stretched across the window's base, invisible in the dusk, which would snap if the sash were raised. As night fell, reading grew quiet. The only sounds, the occasional bark of a dog or the rustle of leaves in the wind. Holmes and I concealed ourselves in the garden behind a dense laurel bush that offered a clear view of the study window. Sandford, at Holmes's insistence, had retired to his bedroom with strict instructions to remain there, leaving the house dark and silent. My revolver, a familiar weight in my pocket, was a reassuring presence, though I hoped it would not be needed. The hours crept by, the chill of the night seeping into my bones. Holmes beside me was as still as a statue, his eyes fixed on the window, his senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. I marveled at his patience, a quality that, in such moments, seemed almost superhuman. My own thoughts wandered, turning over the clues we had gathered. The identical busts, Beppo's shadowy presence, the violent precision of the descriptions. What could drive a man to such lengths for a plaster cast worth a few shillings? It was past midnight when a faint sound broke the silence, a soft crunch of gravel, followed by the whisper of footsteps. Holmes's hand gripped my arm, a silent command to remain still. A shadow moved across the garden, low and furtive, pausing at the study window. The figure was slight, clad in dark clothing, the face obscured by a cap pulled low. With practiced ease, the intruder produced a Tula glazier's diamond. I thought and began to work at the window's latch. The thread snapped with a faint twang, inaudible beyond a few feet. Holmes tensed, his body coiled like a spring. The window slid upward, and the figure slipped inside with the agility of a cat. A moment later, a muffled crash echoed from the study, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Holmes sprang forward, I at his heels, my revolver drawn. We burst through the window to find the intruder standing over the table, the Napoleon bust in fragments at his feet. He whirled at our approach, his face illuminated by the moonlight, swarthy man with dark eyes that gleamed with defiance. Hold, Holmes commanded, his voice like steel. He seized the man by the arm, twisting it with a force that elicited a yelp. Name yourself. The man spat, struggling briefly before sagging in Holmes's grip. Beppo, he snarled, his accent thick, with the cadence of Italy. And you'll get nothing from me. Lestrade, who had been stationed at the front of the house, burst in, his lantern casting a harsh light over the scene. Got him, he exclaimed, producing a pair of handcuffs. Beppo, is it? You're under arrest, my lad. The bust lay in ruins, its plaster shards scattered across the floor. Holmes, still holding Beppo's arm, surveyed the wreckage with a grim expression. "The fourth bust," he said softly, and still no answers. "Lestrade, take him to the station. Watson and I will follow shortly." As Lestrade led the prisoner away, Holmes knelt beside the fragments, his lens in hand. "The same mold, the same method," he murmured. "But why destroy it here, in the open? Beppo, you are a pawn in a larger game, and I mean to find the player." We returned to Sandiford's house to reassure the shaken solicitor who had emerged from his bedroom at the sound of the commotion. Holmes, with his usual efficiency, examined the study for further clues but found nothing beyond the broken bust and a few scuff marks on the floor. "Beppo was alone," he said, "but he acts on orders. The question is, whose?" As we made our way back to the station to catch a late train to London, the weight of the mystery pressed upon me. Beppo's capture was a victory, but it felt incomplete, like a single piece of a vast puzzle. Two busts remained, those of Mr. Morse Hudson in Kennington and the elusive sixth, purchased by Beppo himself. Holmes, I knew, would not rest until the truth was laid bare, and I felt a thrill of anticipation at the thought of what lay ahead. "The trail narrows." "Watson," Holmes said as the train carried us back to London, the darkness of the countryside pressing against the windows. "Beppo is our key, but he is not the lock. Tomorrow we shall see what secrets he guards and what the remaining Napoleons conceal." Chapter 6. The prisoners silenced the capture of Beppo in the act of destroying. Mr. Sandiford's Napoleon bust had brought a new intensity to our investigation, yet it had also deepened the enigma that surrounded the case. As Sherlock Holmes, and I returned to London from reading in the small hours of the morning. The train's rhythmic clatter seemed to echo the relentless churn of my friend's mind. Holmes sat opposite me, his lean frame silhouetted against the dim light of the compartment, his eyes half closed but glittering with the restless energy that marked his pursuit of truth. My own thoughts were a tangle of questions: Beppo's role, the motive behind the bust's destruction, and the significance of the two remaining plaster effigies. "Watson," Holmes said at last, breaking the silence as the train neared Paddington, "we have taken a pawn, but the king remains at large. Beppo's silence will be our next challenge, for I am certain he acts under orders. The question is, whose?" I nodded, my mind still fixed on the scene in Sandiford's study. The shattered bust, Beppo's defiant glare, the swift efficiency of his capture. "He's a rough sort," I ventured. "Do you think he'll talk under questioning?" Holmes's lips twitched in a faint, sardonic smile. "Men like Beppo are stubborn, Watson, but not unbreakable. Fear or self-interest will loosen his tongue. Given time, we must learn what he seeks in these busts, and why he risks so much to destroy them." We arrived at Baker Street in the pre-dawn chill, the city still cloaked in the remnants of night. Mrs. Hudson, roused by our return, provided a pot of strong coffee, which Holmes consumed with the air of a man fueling a machine. I, weary from the night's exertions, took to my notebook, recording the events in reading while they were fresh. Holmes, meanwhile, paced the city room, his pipe sending up clouds of smoke as he muttered to himself, piecing together the fragments of our puzzle. At mid-morning, Inspector Lestrade arrived, his face a mixture of triumph and frustration. "Beppo's in custody at Scotland Yard," he announced, settling into an armchair. "But he's a clamshell, Mr. Holmes. Won't say a word beyond his name. We've checked his record. Beppo Luigi, an Italian immigrant, aged about 30. Worked at Gelder & Co. until last year, when he was sacked for theft. Since then, he's been in and out of trouble. petty larceny, mostly, and known to run with a rough crowd in Soho. Holmes paused in his pacing, his eyes narrowing. Soho, he repeated softly. The Italian Quarter. A fertile ground for secrets, Lestrade. Have you searched his lodgings? We're on it now, said Lestrade. He's been staying in a tenement off Wardour Street. My men are turning the place over, but I don't hold out much hope. He's a slippery one. This Beppo, what do you make of him? Holmes resumed his pacing, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Beppo is a tool, not the craftsman. His actions, the precision of the break-ins, the focus on the bust suggest a purpose beyond his own devising. He knows the value of what he seeks, but I doubt he is the architect of this scheme. We must discover his employer, and quickly, for 2 busts remain, and they are surely marked for destruction. I interjected, my curiosity piqued. Could it be a personal grudge? Perhaps Beppo has some vendetta against Gelder and Co., or against Napoleon himself. Holmes shook his head. A vendetta would lack the specificity of these acts. The busts are not merely defaced. They are systematically destroyed, as if to ensure something within them is obliterated. No, Watson, we return to your earlier hypothesis, something concealed within the plaster. Beppo's involvement at Gelder and Co. during their production strengthens that theory. Lestrade leaned forward, his notebook open. You think there's something hidden in the busts? Gold, jewels, what? Holmes's eyes gleamed. That remains to be seen. But consider, 6 busts cast from a single mold, distributed to disparate owners. 3 are destroyed, 1 by Beppo himself in reading. The pattern suggests a search, a desperate one. Whatever is hidden, it is in 1 bust only, and Beppo does not know which. Lestrade frowned. Then why not steal the busts and examine them later? Why smash them on the spot? A pertinent question, said Holmes. Destruction ensures no one else can claim the prize. It also suggests haste or fear of pursuit. Beppo is not working alone, and his master is impatient. We set out for Scotland Yard, where Beppo was being held in a bare gaslit cell. The man himself was a wiry figure, his swarthy face marked by a scar across one cheek, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of defiance and cunning. He sat on a wooden bench, his manacled hands resting in his lap, and regarded us with a sullen silence as we entered. Beppo Luigi, Holmes began, his voice calm but edged with authority. You have been caught in the act of burglary and vandalism. The destruction of Mr. Sandiford's bust is but the latest in a series of such crimes. Why do you target these Napoleon busts? What do they conceal? Beppo's lips curled in a sneer, but he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the floor. Holmes stepped closer, his eyes boring into the prisoner's. You worked at Gelder and Co., he continued. You had access to the mold, to the casting process. Did you hide something in one of those busts? Speak, man, and save yourself a harsher fate. Beppo's eyes flickered, a brief flash of unease, but his silence held. Lestrade, growing impatient, slammed a hand on the cell's iron bars. You'll talk, my lad, or it'll be the worse for you. We've got you dead to rights. Holmes raised a hand, silencing Lestrade. Force will not avail us here, he said quietly. Beppo fears someone more than he fears the law. Very well, let him stew for now. We shall learn more from other quarters. As we left the cell, Lestrade's frustration was palpable. He's a mule, that one, he muttered. What now, Mr. Holmes? Now, said Holmes, we visit Mr. Morse Hudson in Kennington. His bust is the fifth of the six, and it must be secured before Beppo's Confederates strike again. As for the sixth bust, the one Beppo himself purchased, its whereabouts are our next priority. Lestrade, have your men in Soho redouble their efforts to trace it. We made our way to Kennington, a district of modest shops and terraced houses, south of the Thames. Morse Hudson's tobacconist shop was a small, cluttered establishment, its window filled with pipes, cigar boxes, and a single plaster bust of Napoleon, incongruous among the tobacco paraphernalia. Hudson, a jovial man with a florid face and a booming voice, greeted us with a mixture of surprise and concern. Inspector Lestrade, and these gentlemen must be Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, he said, wiping his hands on his apron. I heard about the busts being smashed. Is mine in danger? Undoubtedly, said Holmes, his eyes fixed on the bust in the window. He approached it, his lens in hand, and examined it closely. The same mould, as expected. Mr. Hudson, how long has this bust been in your possession? About a year, said Hudson. Bought it from Gelder & Co. for the shop window. Thought it gave the place a bit of class, you know. Never imagined it'd bring trouble. Holmes tapped the bust's base, his fingers lingering on a faint crack. This has been handled roughly, he said. Not broken, but tampered with. Mr. Hudson, I must ask you to sell this bust to me. I shall take it to Baker Street for safekeeping. Hudson hesitated, then nodded. If it'll keep the vandals away, it's yours, Mr. Holmes. Name your price. Up. Deal was struck, and the bust was carefully wrapped and loaded into our cab. As we drove back to Baker Street, Holmes's mood was one of quiet triumph. One bust secured, he said. But the sixth remains at large, and Beppo's silence suggests it is the key. Watson, we are on the cusp of a revelation, but the final piece eludes us. Back at our lodgings, Holmes placed the bust on the mantel, its stern features staring down at us like a silent challenge. Tomorrow, he said, lighting his pipe, we shall probe deeper into Soho. Beppo's world is one of shadows, and I mean to bring light to it. The prisoner's silence had yielded no answers, but it had sharpened Holmes's resolve. 4 busts were gone, 1 was in our possession, and the 6th remained a phantom. Its location known only to a man who refused to speak. The trail of the 6 Napoleons was narrowing, and I felt a thrill of anticipation at the thought of what secrets the next day would unveil. Chapter 7. The Kennington Discovery. The morning after Beppo's capture dawned with a crisp clarity that seemed to sharpen the edges of London's sprawling maze, as though the city itself were conspiring to reveal its secrets. Sherlock Holmes, invigorated by the progress of our investigation, was already at work when I rose. His lean figure bent over a pile of notes and maps strewn across the sitting room table at 2-1B Baker Street. The plaster bust of Napoleon, secured from Mr. Morse Hudson's tobacconist shop in Kennington the previous day, stood sentinel on the mantel, its stern features gazing impassively over the chaos of Holmes's papers. My friend's pipe, smouldering in an ashtray, sent up a thin curl of smoke, and his eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man closing in on his quarry. "Watson," said he, glancing up as I entered, "we are at a critical juncture. For busts destroyed, 1 in our possession, and the 6th Beppo's own still eludes us. The Kennington bust may hold the key, but I suspect its secrets are not easily yielded." I nodded, my thoughts returning to the events in Reading the Swift. Capture of Beppo, his sullen refusal to speak, and the tantalizing possibility that the busts concealed something of value. "Do you intend to examine the bust today?" I asked, gesturing to the plaster Napoleon. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Indeed, Watson. But first, we must ensure it is what it seems. Come, let us breakfast quickly. I have a mind to test a theory before Lestrade joins us with his inevitable report." Mrs. Hudson provided a hasty meal of eggs and toast, which Holmes consumed with the distracted air of a man whose thoughts were elsewhere. I, too, felt the stir of anticipation, for the case of the 6 Napoleons had taken on an urgency that belied its humble origins. The destruction of cheap plaster busts, once a mere curiosity, now hinted at a deeper intrigue, and Beppo's involvement pointed to a hidden hand guiding his actions. Shortly after 9, we set to work on the bust. Holmes retrieved a small toolkit from his desk, containing a chisel, a mallet, and a set of fine probes. He placed the bust on the table, its white surface catching the morning light, and began a meticulous examination, his magnifying lens glinting as he traced its contours. "The crack at the base," he murmured, referring to the faint flaw he had noted in Kennington. "It suggests tampering, but of what kind?" With a delicate touch, he inserted a probe into the crack, working it gently along the seam. The plaster was brittle, and I half expected it to crumble under his ministrations. But Holmes's hands were as steady as a surgeon's. After several minutes, he paused, his eyes narrowing. "There," he said softly, pointing to a slight irregularity in the plaster's interior, visible through the widened crack. "A cavity, Watson, not part of the mold's design." My heart quickened. Something hidden inside. Holmes did not reply, but took up the chisel and mallet, his movements precise. With a series of controlled taps, he split the bust along its base, the plaster parting with a soft crunch. The head fell away, revealing a hollow space within. From this cavity, something small and dark tumbled onto the table, glinting in the sunlight, a black pearl, flawless and luminous, the size of a pigeon's egg. I gasped, recognizing it at once. "The black pearl of the Borgias," I exclaimed, recalling the sensational theft reported years ago in the papers. Stolen from a Venetian collector, was it not? Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph as he lifted the pearl, turning it between his fingers. "Indeed, Watson, a prize worth a king's ransom, and the motive for our vandals' rampage. Beppo, or his master, seeks this pearl, hidden in one of the 6 busts during their manufacture at Gelder & Co. They destroy each in turn, uncertain which holds the treasure." I stared at the pearl, its dark luster seeming to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. But why hide it in a bust? And why now? Holmes set the pearl carefully on the table, his expression darkening. "Those are questions we must answer. Beppo worked at Gelder & Co. when the busts were cast. It is likely he secreted the pearl in one, perhaps to conceal it from accomplices or the law. Now, someone Beppo or another knows of its existence, but not its precise location. Hence, the systematic destruction. A sharp knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, whose face bore the weary look of a man who had spent the night wrestling with bureaucracy. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his eyes widening at the sight of the broken bust and the pearl. "Good heavens, what's this?" Holmes held up the pearl, its surface catching the light. "The black pearl of the Borgias, Lestrade. The heart of our mystery. It was hidden in Mr. Hudson's bust, and I suspect it is the reason for Beppo's crimes." Lestrade's jaw dropped, and he sank into a chair. The Borgia pearl. That's been missing for years. You mean to say this whole business-breaking busts, risking arrest was for this? Precisely, said Holmes. Beppo, or his employer, is searching for this pearl. 4 busts are destroyed, and this one has yielded its secret. Only one remains Beppo's own, purchased from Gelder and Co. We must find it before he or his confederates do. Lestrade scribbled furiously in his notebook. My men are still searching Soho for Beppo's lodgings. We've turned up nothing solid yet, but we know he's been seen in a tavern called the Red Lion, a haunt for Italian immigrants. Rough place, full of shady types. Holmes nodded, his fingers drumming on the table. The Red Lion, you say? A promising lead, Watson. We shall pay a visit to this tavern tonight. Beppo's silence in custody suggests he fears someone who knows of the pearl and is willing to kill for it. We must tread carefully. I felt a thrill of unease at the prospect of venturing into Soho's underbelly, but Holmes's calm resolve was infectious. What of the pearl? I asked. Should we not secure it? Holmes wrapped the pearl in a cloth and placed it in his desk drawer. Locking it with a key, he slipped into his waistcoat pocket. It is safe for now, he said, but we must act swiftly. The 6th bust is the last piece of this puzzle, and I suspect its destruction is imminent. That evening, after a day spent in preparation, Holmes and I set out for Soho. He had donned a rough disguiser, labourer's jacket, a flat cap pulled low, and a scarf to obscure his features. I followed suit, my service revolver tucked discreetly in my coat. The Red Lion, as Lestrade had described, was a dingy establishment tucked in a narrow alley off Wardour Street, its windows clouded with grime and its air thick with the reek of cheap tobacco and cheaper gin. Holmes, with the ease of a chameleon, blended into the crowd of dock workers, labourers, and Italian émigrés who filled the tavern. I kept close, my eyes scanning the faces for any sign of recognition. The patrons spoke in a babble of languages, Italian, and a smattering of Yiddish, and the atmosphere was one of wary camaraderie, as though each man guarded his own secrets. Holmes, nursing a pint of ale, leaned close to a group of Italians at the bar, his ear attuned to their conversation. I could not follow the rapid Italian, but Holmes's sudden stillness told me he had heard something of import. After a moment, he steered me to a quiet corner, his voice low. A name. Watson Vannucci. They speak of a man named Vannucci, a fence known to deal in stolen goods. He has been asking about Beppo and the busts. Vannucci, I repeated, my pulse quickening. Could he be the one behind this? It is likely, said Holmes. Beppo is a tool, as I suspected. Vannucci is the hand that wields him. We must find this man, and quickly. We left the Red Lion, the night air sharp, after the tavern's stifling warmth. Holmes's disguise had served us well, but I could sense the urgency in his stride as we made our way back to Baker Street. The Kennington discovery has changed the game, he said, his voice low. The pearl confirms our theory, but involvement suggests a larger network. The 6th bust is our final chance to catch him. As we reached our lodgings, the bust on the mantel seemed to mock us with its silent presence, a reminder of the one that remained at large. 4 busts destroyed, one yielding the black pearl, and one still hidden in the shadows of Soho. The trail of the 6 Napoleons was drawing to a close, and I felt the weight of the coming confrontation. Holmes, however, was undaunted, his mind already plotting the next move in this deadly game of cat and mouse. Tomorrow, Watson, he said, lighting his pipe, we shall hunt for Venucci. The sixth bust awaits, and with it, the truth. Chapter 8. The final bust, the revelation of the black pearl of the Borgias, concealed within the Kennington bust, had cast a new light upon the strange affair of the 6 Napoleons, transforming what had seemed a series of petty vandalisms into a quest for a prize of incalculable value. As Sherlock Holmes and I sat in our Baker Street lodgings that evening, the air thick with the scent of his shag tobacco, the weight of our discovery hung between us like a tangible presence. The plaster bust, now reduced to fragments on the table, had yielded its secret, but the sixth and final bust, the one purchased by Beppo, himself remained at large, a phantom that held the key to the mystery's resolution. Holmes, pacing before the fire, was a study in restless energy, his lean frame taut with the anticipation of the chase. "For busts destroyed, Watson," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "One has revealed the pearl, and one remains unaccounted for. Beppo's silence in custody confirms my suspicion. He is a pawn, acting under the direction of a greater mind. This Venucci, overheard in the Red Lion, is our true quarry. He seeks the pearl, and he will stop at nothing to claim it." I nodded, my thoughts still reeling from the sight of the pearl, its dark luster a mute testament to the greed that had driven this spree of destruction. "But why destroy the busts?" I asked. "If Venucci knows the pearl is hidden in one, why not steal them and search at leisure?" Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing as he lit his pipe. "A question that has vexed me, Watson. Destruction suggests urgency, or fear that another might find the pearl first, or that its hiding place might be compromised. Venucci, I suspect, is not alone in his knowledge. There may be others, rivals perhaps, who know of the pearl's existence, but not its precise location. Hence the need to obliterate each bust, ensuring no one else claims the prize." The clock on the mantel struck 9, its chime a reminder of the hours slipping away. Holmes, undeterred by the late hour, turned to me with a glint in his eye. "We must act tonight, Watson. Soho is our battlefield, and the sixth bust our objective. Venucci will be hunting it, and we must reach it before he does." We set out into the night, Holmes once again adopting the guise of a labourer, his flat cap pulled low, a worn jacket concealing his frame, and a scarf masking his sharp features. I followed suit, my service revolver a reassuring weight in my coat pocket. The streets of Soho were alive with the pulse of London's underbelly, gaslit taverns spilling raucous laughter, street vendors hawking their wares, and shadowy figures moving through the fog like spectres. The Red Lion, where Holmes had overheard whispers of Venucci, was our starting point. But our true destination was the tenement where Beppo was believed to reside. Lestrade's inquiries had finally borne fruit. Beppo's lodgings had been traced to a dilapidated building in a narrow court off Wardour Street, a warren of crumbling tenements where the air was thick with the stench of refuse and cheap cooking. Holmes, with his uncanny knack for navigating such places, led us through the maze of alleys to a sagging structure, its windows dark save for a single flickering light on the top floor. "This is it," Holmes whispered, his eyes scanning the building. "Beppo's room, if Lestrade's informants are correct. The sixth bust is likely here, and Venucci will know it. We must be swift." We ascended the creaking stairs, the wood groaning under our weight. The top floor was a corridor of peeling paint and locked doors, the air heavy with the musty odor of neglect. Holmes paused at a door marked with a faint chalk scrawl, his ear pressed to the wood. A faint rustle came from within, followed by the unmistakable sound of plaster cracking. Holmes drew his pistol, a rare precaution that underscored the gravity of the moment. "Now, Watson," he hissed, and with a swift kick, he burst the door open. Inside, a dimly lit room revealed a scene of chaos. A tall, gaunt man with a hawk-like face stood over a small table, a hammer in one hand and the sixth Napoleon bust in fragments at his feet. He whirled at our entrance, his eyes blazing with fury. Two burly Confederates flanked him, their hands reaching for weapons concealed in their coats. Holmes barked, leveling his pistol. "Drop the hammer and stand back." Vannucci, I presumed, hesitated, his gaze darting to the shattered bust. "You're too late, Holmes," he snarled, his voice thick with an Italian accent. "The pearl's not here." Holmes's eyes flicked to the fragments, his expression unreadable. "Step away, Vannucci. You and your men are under arrest." The two Confederates lunged, but I was ready, my revolver trained on the nearest. "Don't move," I shouted, and to my relief, they froze, their hands raised. Vannucci, however, was not so easily cowed. With a snarl, he hurled the hammer at Holmes and bolted for the window, aiming for the fire escape beyond. Holmes ducked, the hammer clattering against the wall, and sprang after him. I followed, leaving the Confederates to be secured by Lestrade, who had arrived at the sound of the commotion. The fire escape rattled under Vannucci's weight as he descended, Holmes in close pursuit. I reached the window just in time to see Holmes tackle the fleeing man in the alley below, pinning him to the ground with a wrestler's grip. "Enough." Holmes panted, wrenching Vannucci's arms behind him. "The game is up." Lestrade's men swarmed the alley, handcuffs snapping shut on Vannucci and his accomplices. The tenement room, now illuminated by police lanterns, revealed the full extent of the destruction. The sixth bust lay in pieces, its plaster shards scattered across the floor, but no pearl gleamed among them. Holmes, kneeling beside the debris, examined it with his lens, his face a mask of concentration. "Nothing," he said at last, rising with a grim expression. "The pearl was in the Kennington bust, as we suspected." Vannucci's search was in vain. Lestrade, breathless from the chase, joined us. "We've got them, Mr. Holmes. Vannucci and his lot will face the dock. But what's this about the pearl?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. The black pearl of the Borgias Lestrade was hidden in Mr. Hudson's bust, which we secured yesterday. Vannucci and Beppo have been destroying the busts in a desperate bid to find it, unaware that we had already claimed the prize. Vannucci, now handcuffed and glowering, spat on the floor. "You think you've won, Holmes. You know nothing of the stakes." Holmes regarded him coldly. "I know enough, Vannucci. Your greed has led you to ruin. Take him away, Lestrade." As the prisoners were led off, Holmes lingered in the room, his gaze fixed on the shattered bust. "The final bust," he murmured, "and with it, the end of their hunt. But questions remain, Watson. How did the pearl come to be hidden, and why?" Now, we returned to Baker Street in the early hours, the city settling into a restless slumber. The black pearl, locked in Holmes's desk, seemed to cast a shadow over our lodgings, a reminder of the violence it had inspired. 4 busts destroyed, 1 yielding its treasure, and now the 6th reduced to rubble. The trail of the 6 Napoleons had led us to this moment, but I sensed that Holmes's mind was still at work, probing the edges of a mystery not yet fully resolved. "Tomorrow," he said, settling into his armchair with a fresh pipe. "We shall hear Venucci's story. The final bust has fallen, but its fragments may yet speak." Chapter 9. The Trap. The discovery of the black pearl of the Borgias within the Kennington bust had illuminated the motive behind the strange series of crimes that had consumed our attention. Yet the capture of Venucci and his confederates in the act of destroying the sixth and final Napoleon bust had not brought the sense of closure I had expected. As Sherlock Holmes and I returned to Baker Street in the grey light of dawn, the city stirring faintly around us, a restless energy clung to my friend. The pearl, now locked securely in his desk, was a prize one, but Holmes's mind was still at work, sifting through the fragments of the case for any lingering threads of mystery. "Watson," he said, settling into his armchair with a fresh pipe, the air soon thick with the acrid scent of shag tobacco. "We have the pearl, and we have Venucci, but the story is incomplete. Beppo's role, Venucci's desperation, these suggest a deeper design. The sixth bust yielded nothing, as I suspected, but we must confirm the full scope of this affair." I nodded, my own thoughts heavy with the night's events, the chaotic scene in the Soho tenement, Venucci's futile destruction of the final bust, and his bitter defiance as he was led away. "Do you think Venucci will talk?" I asked. "Beppo's silence has been stubborn enough." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Venucci is a different breed, Watson. Beppo is a foot soldier, loyal or fearful enough to hold his tongue. Venucci, I suspect, is the architect, or at least a partner in this scheme. He will speak, if only to save himself. But we must be cunning. A trap is needed to loosen his lips." The morning brought Inspector Lestrade, his face a mixture of exhaustion and triumph, his notebook bulging with the details of the arrests. "We've got Venucci and his two roughs locked up tight," he said, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Hudson. "Beppo's still silent as a stone, but Venucci's been muttering nothing clear. Mind you, just curses and hints about being cheated." "What's your next move, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Venucci believes the pearl is still at large, Lestrade. He destroyed the sixth bust in the hope of finding it, unaware that we secured it from Mr. Hudson's shop. Let us use that ignorance to our advantage. I propose a stratagem: spread a rumor in Soho that the black pearl has been found not by us, but by an anonymous party. Let it be whispered in the taverns and alleys that the prize is in new hands, ready to be sold. Venucci in custody will hear of it through the grapevine, and it may provoke him to reveal what he knows." Lestrade's eyes widened. "A rumor? That's a risky game, Mr. Holmes. It could stir up every crook in London looking for a piece of the pearl." "Precisely," said Holmes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But we shall control the narrative. Have your most discreet men plant the story in the Red Lion and other haunts frequented by Venucci's associates. Let it be known that the pearl is to be auctioned in secret, and watch who comes sniffing. Meanwhile, keep Venucci under close guard, but allow him access to a trusted informant, one who can carry the rumor to him." Lestrade scribbled in his notebook, his skepticism giving way to grudging admiration. "I'll see it done, Mr. Holmes, but what if Venucci doesn't bite?" "Then we shall have lost nothing," said Holmes, "but I wager he will. Greed and fear are powerful motivators, and Venucci has both in abundance." The plan was set in motion with characteristic efficiency. Lestrade dispatched 2 of his plainclothes men to Soho, where they posed as disreputable types, spreading whispers of the pearl's discovery in the smoky confines of the Red Lion and other dens. Holmes, meanwhile, arranged for a trusted former pickpocket turned occasional ally named Wiggins, leader of the Baker Street irregulars, to infiltrate Scotland Yard's cells as a supposed prisoner, close enough to Vannucci to relay the rumor. That afternoon, Holmes and I ventured back to Soho to observe the effects of our trap. Disguised once more as labourers, we took up a post in a dimly lit coffee house across from the Red Lion, where we could watch the comings and goings without drawing attention. The alley was alive with the usual traffic of the Quarter Street musicians, hawkers and shifty figures darting between shadows. Holmes's eyes, sharp beneath the brim of his cap, missed nothing. "See there," he murmured, nodding toward. A wiry man with a scarred face lingering near the tavern's entrance. One of Vannucci's circle, no doubt. The rumor is taking root. Watch how he moves, nervous, expectant. He's waiting for word. I strained to see the man, whose quick glances suggested a predator scenting prey. "Do you think he'll lead us to others involved?" I asked, my hand resting near my revolver. "Possibly," said Holmes. "But our true aim is Vannucci's reaction. If he believes the pearl is in play, he may reveal his confederates, whose employer, if such exists." As evening fell, the trap began to yield results. Wiggins, slipping into Baker Street under cover of dusk, brought word from Scotland Yard. "Vannucci's rattled, Mr. Holmes," he reported, his boyish face alight with the thrill of the game. "Heard the rumor from me, casual-like, while I was sweeping the cells." He didn't say much, but he got real quiet. Then started muttering about a double-cross and someone called the Padrone. Kept saying he'd been cheated, that the pearl was his by rights. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The Padrone," he repeated softly. "A term of respect or fear. Excellent work, Wiggins. Keep your ears open and report any further murmurs." As Wiggins departed, Holmes turned to me, his expression one of quiet triumph. "The trap is sprung, Watson. Vannucci's fear of betrayal will loosen his tongue. This Padrone is likely the true mastermind, the one who set Beppo and Vannucci to their task. We must now press our advantage." That night, we joined Lestrade at Scotland Yard, where Vannucci was brought to an interrogation room. The man was a shadow of the defiant figure we had captured in Soho, his gaunt face pale, his eyes darting with a mixture of anger and dread. Holmes, seated across from him, adopted a tone of calm authority. His gaze piercing. "Vannucci," he began, "you have pursued the Black Pearl of the Borgias, destroying 5 busts in your quest. The 6th, as you know, yielded nothing. But I have news. The pearl has been found, not by you, but by another. It is to be sold, and your chance is slipping away. Speak now, and tell us who set you on this path. Who is the Padrone?" Vannucci's hands clenched, his knuckles white. "You lie, Holmes," he snarled, but his voice trembled. "The pearl was mine, and the Padrone's. Beppo was a fool, hiding it in the busts, but I knew it was there. I'd have found it if you hadn't meddled." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and relentless. "Beppo hid the pearl, but on whose orders? The Padrone's. Name him Vannucci, or face the gallows alone." Vannucci's eyes flickered, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. For a moment, I thought he would hold his silence, but the weight of Holmes's words and the fear of betrayal proved too much. "It was Carlucci," he muttered at last, his voice barely audible. "Giuseppe Carlucci, he's the Padrone, the one who planned it all. He knew Beppo had the pearl, and he sent me to find it. Said it was our ticket to riches." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I could sense the triumph beneath it. "Carlucci," he repeated. Where is he now? Vannucci slumped, defeated, hiding in Limehouse, near the docks. A warehouse on Narrow Street. That's all I know, I swear. Lestrade, who had been listening intently, sprang to his feet. We'll raid the place tonight, he said. If Carlucci's there, we'll have him. Holmes raised a hand. Patience, Lestrade. Carlucci is cunning, and a raid may drive him underground. Let us confirm his presence first. Watson and I will reconnoiter the warehouse under cover of darkness. If Carlucci is there, we shall ensure he does not slip away. As we left Scotland Yard, the trap we had set had borne fruit, but the game was not yet over. The name of Giuseppe Carlucci, the mysterious padrone, had emerged from the shadows, and with it, the promise of a final confrontation. The Black Pearl was safe, the busts accounted for, but the mastermind remained at large, and I knew Holmes would not rest until the trail of the 6 Napoleons led us to him. Chapter 10. The Confession. The revelation of Giuseppe Carlucci as the mastermind behind the destruction of the 6 Napoleon busts had set the stage for a final act in this strange drama, and as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to venture into the shadowed precincts of Limehouse, a sense of impending resolution hung over us. The Black Pearl of the Borgias, safely locked in Holmes's desk at Baker Street, had been the prize driving Beppo and Vannucci's desperate campaign, but it was Carlucci, the elusive padrone, who now held the key to the mystery's full unraveling. The trap we had set, with its whispered rumors of the Pearl's discovery, had loosened Vannucci's tongue, and his confession in the interrogation room had given us a name and a place. Narrow Street, Limehouse, a district notorious for its labyrinthine alleys and the lawless air that clung to its docks. It was past midnight when Holmes and I, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade and a small contingent of plainclothes constables, set out for Limehouse. Holmes had insisted on a cautious approach, wary of alerting Carlucci to our presence. He donned a rough disguiser, docker's cap, and a weathered coat while I kept my service revolver close, its familiar weight a steadying presence in the fog-laden night. The streets of Limehouse were a stark contrast to the bustling chaos of Soho. Here, the air was thick with the briny tang of the Thames, mingled with the acrid scent of tar and coal dust. The gas lamps cast feeble pools of light, leaving long stretches of shadow where anything might lurk. Holmes led the way, his knowledge of London's underbelly as unerring as a map. Narrow Street, a crooked thoroughfare running parallel to the river, was lined with warehouses and derelict buildings, their windows dark and shuttered. The warehouse Vannucci had named was a looming structure of blackened brick, its iron gates rusted but formidable. A faint light flickered in an upper window, a sign of life within. Carlucci is cautious, Holmes whispered as we crouched behind a stack of crates across the street. He will have lookouts. Lestrade, keep your men back until I signal. Watson, stay close. We crept toward the warehouse, Holmes moving with the silent grace of a panther. A side door, half hidden by a pile of rotting timbers, yielded to his deft manipulation of a picklock. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, smelling of mold and oil. The faint creak of floorboards overhead betrayed movement, and Holmes motioned for silence as we ascended a rickety staircase. At the top, a dimly lit room opened before us, cluttered with crates and barrels. In the center, a man stood over a table strewn with papers and a single lantern, his back to us. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of dark hair and a posture that spoke of authority. This, I knew, must be Giuseppe Carlucci. Holmes stepped forward, his pistol drawn. Carlucci, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Your game is over. The Black Pearl is in our hands, and your confederates are in custody. Carlucci whirled, his face a mask of rage and calculation. His eyes, dark and piercing, took in Holmes, myself, and the constables who had followed us up. For a moment, I thought he might bolt, but the sight of Lestrade's men at the door seemed to quell the impulse. He raised his hands slowly, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Holmes," he said, his voice smooth with a heavy Italian accent, "I should have known you'd meddle. The pearl was mine by right." Holmes's gaze was unwavering. "Yours by theft, you mean? Speak, Carlucci. How did the pearl come to be hidden in the busts, and why now?" Carlucci's smile faded, replaced by a look of resignation. He sank onto a crate, his shoulders slumping. "Very well," he said. "You've won, so I'll tell you. It began 3 years ago, in Venice. I was part of a you'd call us. We stole the Black Pearl from a collector's vault. Beppo was with us, a low man, but clever with his hands. When the law closed in, he fled to London, taking the pearl with him. The fool hid it in a plaster bust at Gelder & Co., where he worked, thinking it safe until the heat died down." Holmes nodded, his expression impassive. "And you lost track of him for a time," Carlucci admitted. "Beppo was cunning, but not loyal. He kept the pearl's hiding place secret, even from me. Last year, I traced him to London, to Gelder's. By then, the busts had been sold, 6 of them, cast from the same mold. I didn't know which held the pearl, and Beppo wouldn't talk. So I sent Vannucci to find him, to force the truth out, and I interjected, unable to contain my curiosity. Why smash the busts?" Carlucci's eyes darkened, because Beppo was a fool. He swore he'd forgotten which bust held the pearl, said it was safer that way, in case he was caught. I didn't believe him, but I had no choice. Vannucci and I tracked the busts, one by one, breaking them to find the prize. Every time we came up empty, I thought Beppo had betrayed me, sold the pearl behind my back. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "And so you destroyed them, ensuring no one else could claim it. A desperate plan, Carlucci, and one that failed. The pearl was in the 5th bust, secured from Mr. Morse Hudson in Kennington. Your search was for naught." Carlucci's face contorted with fury, but he said nothing, his hands clenching into fists. Lestrade stepped forward, handcuffs at the ready. "That's enough, Carlucci. You're under arrest for theft, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You'll answer for it all." As the constables led Carlucci away, Holmes surveyed the room, his eyes lingering on the papers scattered across the table. He sifted through them, finding little beyond invoices and coded notes that hinted at Carlucci's wider operations. "A syndicate," as he said, Holmes murmured. But the pearl was his obsession. With it gone, his empire crumbles. We returned to Baker Street as the first light of dawn crept over the city, the weight of the case lifting with Carlucci's confession. The Black Pearl, still locked in Holmes's desk, seemed to pulse with the greed and violence it had inspired, a mute witness to the downfall of those who sought it. Beppo, Vannucci, and now Carlucci were in custody, their scheme unraveled by Holmes's relentless logic. As we settled into our armchairs, Holmes lit his pipe, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "A curious affair, Watson," he said. "A pearl hidden in plaster, a trail of broken busts, and a trio of thieves undone by their own desperation. The confession closes the circle, but it reminds us how even the smallest object can conceal a great secret. I took up my pen, eager to record the tale, though I knew the full weight of it would linger long after the ink had dried. The trail of the 6 Napoleons had led us through London's shadows to a truth as dazzling and dangerous as the pearl itself, and I felt a thrill of pride at having played my part in its unraveling. Chapter the 11th. The resolution, the arrest of Giuseppe Carlucci in the dim, musty warehouse on Narrow Street had brought the affair of the 6 Napoleons to a climactic close. Yet as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to Baker Street in the pale light of dawn, a sense of quiet reflection settled over us. The black pearl of the Borgias, now secure in Holmes's desk, had been the catalyst for a spree of destruction that had baffled London's police and drawn us into one of the most curious cases of our association. Carlucci's confession had laid bare the motives greed, betrayal, and desperation that had driven Beppo and Vannucci to shatter the plaster busts. But the final threads of the matter required tying off before the case could be fully resolved. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of our sitting room, casting a warm glow over the familiar clutter of books, chemical apparatus, and the fragments of the Kennington bust which still lay upon the table. Holmes, seated in his armchair, lit his pipe with a deliberate air, his sharp features softened by a rare moment of repose. I, weary from the night's exertions but eager to see the matter through, took up my notebook to record the details while they remained fresh. Lestrade will be here soon. No doubt, Holmes remarked, exhaling a cloud of smoke. He'll want to wrap this up with a neat bow for Scotland Yard's records. But the pearl, Watson, that is the final piece. It must be returned to its rightful owners, and we must ensure no further mischief arises from it. I glanced at the desk where the black pearl lay hidden, its dark luster a silent reminder of the violence it had inspired. Who are the rightful owners? I asked. The Venetian collector from whom it was stolen? Or has it passed through too many hands to trace? Holmes's eyes gleamed with a hint of amusement. A practical question, Watson, and one we shall address. The pearl's history is tangled, but its theft 3 years ago from Signor Antonio Moretti of Venice is well documented. I shall telegraph him today to confirm his claim. In the meantime, we must guard against any lingering confederates of Carlucci's syndicate who might still seek the prize. As if summoned by Holmes's words, a sharp knock announced Inspector Lestrade's arrival. He entered with his usual briskness, his ferret-like features alight with the satisfaction of a case concluded. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, settling into a chair, "we've got Carlucci, Vannucci, and Beppo locked up tight. The 2 roughs from the warehouse are singing like canaries, though they know little beyond their orders to guard Carlucci. The Yard's pleased. I can tell you, though, I'll give credit where it's due. This was your show, Holmes." Holmes waved a hand dismissively, though I detected a flicker of pleasure in his expression. "The credit is yours, Lestrade, for acting swiftly on our information. But tell me, have you searched Carlucci's warehouse thoroughly? His papers may reveal more of his syndicate." Lestrade nodded, producing a sheaf of notes. "My men are still at it, but we've found enough ledgers, coded ledgers, names of contacts in Venice and Paris. Carlucci ran a tidy operation, fencing stolen goods across the continent. The pearl was his crowning ambition, but it seems he overreached. Beppo's betrayal, hiding the pearl and the busts through a spanner in the works." Holmes leaned forward, his pipe forgotten, and Beppo, has he broken his silence? "Not a word," said Lestrade, his face darkening. "He's loyal to Carlucci, or scared stiff. Either way, he's no use to us. Vannucci's confession and Carlucci's own words are enough to put them all away, though. Holmes nodded, his gaze drifting to the window where the morning traffic of Baker Street was beginning to stir. Then our work is nearly done. The pearl must be returned, and the case closed. But I confess, Watson, there is a certain elegance in its simplicity. Treasure hidden in a plaster bust, pursued through the streets of London by men blinded by greed. I smiled, struck by the contrast between the case's humble beginnings and its dramatic conclusion. It's a tale for your memoirs, Holmes. The public will be fascinated by the Black Pearl's role. Holmes's lips twitched in a rare smile. Perhaps, Watson, though I care little for the public's fascination, the puzzle itself is reward enough. Still, I shall decline any reward. For the pearl's recovery, let it be returned to Signor Moretti, and let London forget the 6 Napoleons. Later that day, Holmes drafted a telegram to Venice, confirming the pearl's recovery and arranging for its secure transport to Signor Moretti, Lestrade. Meanwhile, coordinated with Scotland Yard to ensure Carlucci's syndicate was dismantled, his contacts traced, and his operations curtailed. The fragments of the busts collected from Kensington, Chelsea, Bloomsbury, Reading, and Soho were catalogued as evidence, their plaster shards a mute testament to the lengths men would go for a single jewel. By evening, the formalities were complete. The pearl, carefully packed in a velvet-lined case, was entrusted to a courier under Lestrade's supervision, bound for Venice via a guarded route. Holmes, true to his word, refused any fee, though he accepted a letter of thanks from Moretti, which he tossed into a drawer with a careless air dot as we sat by the fire that night. The sitting room quiet, save for the crackle of the logs, I felt a sense of completion that had been absent in the frenetic days of the investigation. The trail of the 6 Napoleons had led us through London's shadows, from the cluttered shop of Horace Harker to the grim warehouse in Limehouse, and each step had revealed a layer of human greed and cunning. Beppo's desperate act of concealment, Vannucci's ruthless pursuit, and Carlucci's overreaching ambition had woven a tapestry of crime that Holmes had unravelled with his usual precision. "What strikes me most," I said, breaking the silence, "is how ordinary it began. A few broken busts, hardly worth a second glance, yet behind them lay a fortune and a syndicate." Holmes exhaled a cloud of smoke, his eyes half closed. "The ordinary is often the veil, Watson. A plaster bust, a street corner, a whispered rumour, these are the threads of life's great tapestry. Our task is to see the pattern where others see only chaos." I took up my pen, eager to commit the adventure to paper, though I knew no words could fully capture the brilliance of Holmes's mind or the thrill of the chase. The Black Pearl was on its way home, the criminals were in custody, and the 6 Napoleons were no more. The case was closed, but its echoes lingered, a reminder of the hidden depths beneath the surface of the everyday. Chapter 12. A reflection with the Black Pearl of the Borgias safely dispatched to its rightful owner in Venice, and the perpetrators Beppo, Vannucci, and the formidable Giuseppe Carlucci securely in the hands of Scotland Yard. The strange affair of the 6 Napoleons had reached its conclusion. The fog that had clung to London during the early days of our investigation had lifted, and a pale autumn sun bathed Baker Street in a gentle glow as Sherlock Holmes and I settled into our familiar quarters at 2-1B. The sitting room, with its cluttered shelves, chemical apparatus, and the lingering scent of shag tobacco, seemed a haven of calm after the tumult of the past week. Yet, as I took up my pen to record the final chapter of this adventure, I felt a quiet awe at the intricate web we had unraveled. A web spun from the most unassuming of threads. 6 plaster busts of Napoleon Bonaparte. Holmes, lounging in his armchair by the fire, was in a reflective mood. His long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his pipe sending up lazy curls of smoke. The fragments of the Kennington bust, which had yielded the pearl, still lay upon the table, their white plaster catching the firelight like the bones of some ancient relic. I watched him, marveling at the ease with which he transitioned from the fevered intensity of the chase to this contemplative repose, as though the solving of the mystery had restored a balance to his restless mind. "Holmes," I ventured, setting my pen aside for a moment, "this case has been among the most singular of our adventures. To think that a fortune was hidden within a plaster bust, and that men would destroy so much to find it tits a tale that seems almost fantastical." Holmes's eyes, half closed, flickered with a trace of amusement. "Fantastical, Watson. Perhaps to the uninitiated, but to those who see, the world is full of such wonders, concealed in the mundane. A plaster bust, a loaf of bread, a worn shoe can hold a story if one knows how to read it." I smiled, accustomed to his penchant for finding significance in the ordinary. "Still, the audacity of it, Beppo, hiding the black pearl in a bust. Carlucci orchestrating its recovery through destruction. It's a scheme that could only thrive in the shadows of a city like London." Holmes nodded, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "London is a crucible, Watson, where greed and cunning are forged into strange alloys. Beppo's act was one of desperation, a thief's gambit to preserve his prize. Carlucci's, however, was calculation, a cold, relentless pursuit of wealth. Yet both were undone by their own flaws. Beppo's fear, Carlucci's hubris. It is ever thus with those who seek to outwit fate." I turned to my notes, the pages filled with the details of our journey from Horace Harker's shattered shop window in Kensington to the grim warehouse in Limehouse where Carlucci had met his downfall. Each incident, each fragment of plaster, had been a step toward the truth, guided by Holmes's unerring logic. "The public will clamor for this story," I said. "The Black Pearl, the busts, the chase through Soho, it's the sort of tale that captures the imagination." Holmes waved a hand dismissively, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of satisfaction. "Let the public have their tales, Watson. I seek only the clarity of the puzzle solved. The pearl is returned, the criminals are in chains, and the 6 Napoleons are no more. That is enough." I thought of Inspector Lestrade, who had departed earlier that day with a rare word of gratitude, his notebook brimming with the details that would secure convictions for Beppo, Vannucci, and Carlucci. The coded ledgers from the Limehouse warehouse had revealed the extent of Carlucci's syndicate, a network of thieves and fencers stretching from London to the continent, now dismantled by Scotland Yard's efforts. The Black Pearl, dispatched under guard to Signor Antonio Moretti in Venice, had closed a chapter of theft that had begun 3 years prior, and I could not help but feel a pang of pride at our role in its resolution. As the fire crackled, I ventured, "One final question. Do you think there are other secrets hidden in such ordinary things, Holmes? Other pearls, other mysteries waiting to be uncovered?" He turned to me, his gaze piercing yet softened by the firelight. "Always, Watson. The world is a tapestry of secrets, woven from the threads of everyday life. Our task is to pluck those threads, to see the pattern where others see only chaos. The 6 Napoleons were but one such pattern, and there will be others." I took up my pen again, the weight of his words settling over me. The adventure of the 6 Napoleons had begun with a seemingly trivial act, the smashing of a cheap plaster bust, and had led us through the shadows of London to a truth as dazzling as the pearl itself. It was a reminder, as Holmes had said, that even the most mundane object could conceal a story, and that, in his hands, no secret could remain hidden for long. As the evening drew on, the sounds of Baker Street faded into a gentle hum, the city at rest beyond our windows. Holmes, his pipe now cold, rose and crossed to the mantel, where he absently traced a finger over the remaining fragments of the Kennington bust. "Write it well, Watson," he said softly, a rare note of warmth in his voice. "Let it stand, as a testament to the unseen, to the truths that lie beneath the surface." And so I did, my pen moving steadily across the page, capturing the tale of the 6 Napoleons, a story of greed, cunning, and the relentless pursuit of truth, woven from the fragments of a city and the genius of a singular mind. The end.